Hello and welcome to On Point. I'm Mariah Robinson. In this digital age, many of us frequently share important personal information online without thinking about it. Today, we use technology for everything. Filing taxes, applying for financial aid, booking a flight, or requesting an Uber all require an online account with your personal information. Although the Fourth Amendment can be interpreted as protecting the right to privacy, the word privacy isn't actually in the U.S. Constitution. Now, some people argue that with our society's growing use and dependency on technology, constitutional laws need to be adjusted to protect our digital privacy. We asked CSUN students if they feel their privacy or national security is more important.
I believe that the government kind of waves their privacy flag and decides what they want to in terms of, asking Apple for information or asking corporations in general or individuals for information by just saying, sorry, but this is for national security purposes. Please give us any information we want.
I definitely believe that encryption is important for not only national security, but also, banks use as encryptions. Any kind of, secure transactions on the internet uses some form of encryption.
I believe online privacy is more important than national security because I believe that Apple have a right to make a case that they should be private in the information they keep, even though it does pertain to national security in this case with the FBI.
In December 2015, a fatal terrorist attack took place in San Bernardino, California. The FBI seized an iPhone belonging to one of the suspects for investigation. Apple refused the FBI's request to unlock the iPhone. Apple's general counsel, Bruce Sewell, says data encryption would endanger both personal privacy as well as national security in the long run.
To suggest that the American people must choose between privacy and security is to present a false choice. The issue is not about privacy at the expense of security. It's about maximizing safety and security.
The FBI has since gotten help from a third-party service to unlock the San Bernardino iPhone. This case of data encryption raises the question of who has the right to our private information. On Point reporter Sophia Levin has more on this story.
Thank you so much, Mariah. That's right, today we're talking tech privacy and we have a great panel for you. Right by my side is Professor Gina Giotta, Communication Studies at CSUN. We have Professor Luis Celada of Computer Science at Pierce College. And we also had Dr. Kristen Walker, Associate Professor of Marketing here at CSUN. Dr. Walker, I want to start with you.
Okay.
Is it fair to say that we're experiencing a type of a tech privacy zeitgeist right now?
I think you could say that. Privacy is not new, but at the same time, with technology, it's bringing up new privacy issues. I think people are getting tired of the term privacy, but that's a different topic.
Professor Celada, why are we experiencing it right now?
I personally think that just pretty much technology might be going too fast according to all of our mentalities. Technology is advancing so much faster, and if you ask a person, born within the last 15 years, to them there's not such a thing as being careful with their privacy because they're being exposed to it. It's more like for those of us who have from prior generations that we see that difference going to privacy to non-privacy.
Yes, Professor Giotta.
I think to respond to your question about privacy as a sort of zeitgeist that we're all experiencing, I think it absolutely is because of what we learned about the PRISM project and the NSA and what the sort of broad surveillance activities that the government is engaged in are doing to our privacy. And so I think it's absolutely something that we're all concerned with, and Apple in particular is very concerned with privacy because they were implicated in that project, and it really damaged their image. So privacy has become sort of a catchword for them, and they're sort of branding themselves around privacy. So we can't help but hear about the issue in a lot of different ways. So it's absolutely something that we are hearing a lot about, and I think that it should give us a pause to think about what it is exactly that we value about privacy, and why we find it so meaningful and so worthwhile as a sort of concept to fight for.
Thank you for bringing up Apple and especially with the FBI encryption case. Should we have to choose between national security and personal privacy? Dr. Walker?
I don't think there's a choice. And in fact, it's interesting that you bring up the government. And as a marketer, I'm not that concerned about the government. The government has gathered information about us for many, many years and will continue to do so. I think my concern is more with the private companies that are gathering this information and then packaging and selling that information to others for advertising uses. You mentioned branding in terms of Apple. We could sort of debate that, and I think that would be an interesting debate because I think Apple really needed to be on the side of privacy. And in reality, the device that we carry around everywhere we go, whether it's an Apple brand, Samsung, et cetera, it is identifying where we are, who we are, what we do, what our interests are. How many times do you think of something and then do a search on your phone or device? So the growth of mobile, I think, is definitely something that bodes a problem for privacy. The problem is that digital natives, so you mentioned digital immigrants, which I would be a digital immigrant, versus digital natives, millennials in particular, they grew up with this technology. So they view privacy very differently than we do. I don't like people having my name and my address, even though the white pages existed and had my name and address, unless I removed it in the past. They're very comfortable with that, and in fact, very comfortable with geolocation, all of those sorts of tagging things on their devices. It becomes very natural for them. So
I think maybe the difference, though, and I am concerned about government, invasion of privacy as well as corporate invasion of privacy. And I think maybe the difference for me is that, I can opt out of corporate privacy to a certain extent, or at least in theory, I can opt out of corporate invasion of my privacy, but I can't opt out of the government's, broad invasion of my privacy. And so in that regard, I think that, they're related but separate conversations that we need to have. Because you can theoretically not be on Facebook and not be on Twitter, which is going to compromise your privacy in the context of business activities, but you can't opt out of government surveillance. And I think that that's one of the essential differences between those two privacy discussions.
Thank you, Professor. For this panel, we've been in contact with tech reporter Nellie Bowles for The Guardian in Silicon Valley. She couldn't be here today, but we have made a telephone interview with her, and we're gonna have to see what she has to say about the topic of Apple and the FBI encryption. So here is reporter Bowles with more.
The really interesting question from all of this is, who do we trust more? Who ultimately do we trust as our authority? Like, do we trust the government or do we trust Apple? Who makes the best decisions around privacy and security? I think that the FBI was using this case to set a precedent. The ultimate solution that happened is the ideal one. So the FBI eventually figured out a way to break Apple's encryption, which is the ideal solution.
Professor Celada,
Yes.
do you think that Apple should have helped the FBI?
I don't think it was the responsibility. I think the responsibility is to the consumer, to the users or people who purchase their product. That should be the responsibility that they need to be held accountable for. So I personally don't think they should have, or it was the responsibility to do it.
Anyone have any other thoughts?
Well, I'm glad that Apple made the decision that it made, but I think we'd be lying to ourselves if we were persuaded by Apple's grand show of bravery for civil rights and for the Constitution and citizens. Apple had to make a really bold stand about privacy because they had to compensate for the fact that it was revealed that they were working in concert with the United States government and their surveillance of citizens through PRISM. So they had to make a really, really broad show of saying, you know, we're not going to work with the government in this case. And I think it's really interesting if you look at the sort of narrative that developed around Tim Cook's announcement that Apple would not work with the government in this case. You saw a lot of tweets and Facebook posts sort of like cheering for Apple and thanking Apple. I even read one tweet where somebody, you know, said that Tim Cook and Apple are so brave for refusing to cooperate with the United States government. And I think that narrative of like the hero of Apple and the villain of the Justice Department is really convenient for Apple. You know, really, if we want to think about it, this is just sort of two villains facing off against each other. On the one hand, you have this sort of like corporate behemoth that champions the privacy of citizens while infringing on their privacy constantly, trading their privacy as currency. And on the other hand, the Justice Department also infringing on our rights. So really, it's nobody wins because our rights are being trampled in both cases. On the one hand, in the corporate sector, and on the other hand, in the government sector.
Dr. Walker, let's move over to marketing as it comes to Apple. Their privacy policy is one of their strongest marketing tools. Have this encryption case hurt their marketing tool, or has it rather made the company even stronger?
I don't think it's done either, really. I think Apple has a big trust issue, which is why you saw them respond the way they did. So they haven't been trusted for a long time by their consumers. And so it was smart for them to pivot and position themselves as being a quote-unquote champion of privacy. In reality, all privacies do is cover the legal, protect a company, so I don't say something otherwise, protect a company from the fact that they are gathering and sharing that information. So privacy policies are simply a CYA for any corporation. If you read privacy policies, especially, you know, Apple's famous 64-page one, at one point it was, there's a lot in there, and most of that says what they are going to do with the information that you provide. And in reality, what we're doing is we are all, and I think I say this in a paper I have coming out, surrendering our information. We are not sharing it. And that reason is a difference between trust and faith, right? So trust would have you believe that we are certain about what happens to our information. And I think, and I state this in my paper, that in reality, all we have is faith in our interactions and exchanges of information, in particular on things like mobile devices.
Yeah.
So,
ironically, Apple actually had a drop in sales this first quarter of 2016, first time since 2003. Is there speculation can it have anything to do with this case?
I don't think so. I think that has more to do with competition. I think it has with barriers of entry being lower for other competitors. And it has to do with the fact that their devices aren't all that new right now. So hopefully you'll see a rise if they come up with some new peripheral or product.
Yeah, we don't need more devices at the moment. Maybe.
I don't know.
Let's move on. Professor Celada, can you tell our audience more about hacking? What is it? What is hacktivism?
Well, let's start with the word hacking, right?
Yes.
So hacking is pretty much any unauthorized, a person using any measures to have unauthorized access to another system in order to steal their data. So now then we have the term hacktivism, where we have individuals trying to claim that they are hacking to other systems in order to retrieve data in order for political or social causes. So that's when we get the term hacktivism. But in short, it's just somebody doing an illegal form of activity by accessing data that they don't have permissions to access.
The Robin Hood of data?
They're trying to be the Robin Hood, but after all, they're still committing a crime.
Hacking is a crime, is that what you're saying?
It is a crime, correct.
Okay. We're gonna go back to reporter Nellie Bowles again. Could this tech privacy be that constitutional laws are not keeping up with technical laws? Is that the issue we're facing here? So let's toss it over to reporter Nellie Bowles again.
I think our technology is advancing at an unprecedented pace, and our legal system is not keeping up. There's just no way around it. There are going to be a lot of solutions. One of them is just getting more tech-literate people in office, getting more Silicon Valley people to work for D.C. and to go to D.C., I think is another big solution. You have these two really separate cultures moving at two really different paces, and we're starting to see a lot of situations where that is becoming a major problem.
Professor Giotta, do you agree with Professor Bowles? Reporter Bowles.
I don't know that getting more tech-literate people in the government is necessarily going to be a boon for privacy rights. The government has a lot of really tech-savvy people working for it, and so I don't know that that's necessarily going to remedy the situation. In terms of the question of adding a constitutional amendment, that's unlikely to happen. I think, as most of us know, privacy is not actually even really explicitly guaranteed by the Constitution in the same way that publicity or publicness is when we look at the First Amendment. It's only sort of inferred by the Fourth Amendment, which suggests that the government doesn't have the right to illegal search and seizure. So I don't know that we're gonna see many laws that are going to change things in a significant way, because the sort of infringement of our privacy rights, it's a political project, and it's one that it's sort of a long game, a long-term project, right? And it requires a lot of commitment from a lot of different parties, and it happens really slowly. It's like a slow-moving sea. You just don't even see it happening. And so all of these sort of fights around privacy are little sort of blips on a radar that I just don't see them really. I don't see them actually changing anything, because there's a long-term plan for state surveillance and corporate surveillance that isn't going to accommodate increased privacy rights for citizens.
Dr. Walker, please share your thoughts.
I think it revolves a lot around, and this gets to a little of what you're saying, protection and security. And it's up to us to decide who we want to be protected from and how secure we want to be. And I think when you say politics, that issue gets confused depending on the politician presenting their sort of pitch for it. I think we do it a disservice by calling it privacy these days, because again, I don't think digital natives look at it like privacy. I have a 12-year-old daughter. She's going to look at it much differently. The amount of information that she provides when she's at school, searching for information in a class using a computer, all of that is gathered. And ultimately, you can put together a digital footprint or a digital profile of someone, and that's what the FTC is concerned about. In terms of what she talked about with technology, I do think that there are things that are changing in Washington. They might have a lot of technology people working in Washington, but in the regulation side of things, it is actually brand new. So the Federal Trade Commission only hired their chief technologists, I think, 2 to 3 years ago. Forgive me for not knowing exactly, but that's pretty recent on the blip of technology. And they're there to sort of represent that point of view of how technology can be used to help protect consumers. So there are parts of government that are still trying to protect consumers. The FCC just entered the field too. But there is a side that's missing, and that is that marketing side, right? That is the side that, marketers, we want to best serve you. We want to serve your needs and your wants. And the more we can know about you, the better we can help serve your needs and wants. And I think that consumers are going to really have to demand something. I don't know if it can be called privacy or will be called privacy in the future, but they're going to have to demand that companies not, much like the UK, right, not be able to gather and store information in the way that they do now in the US.
Professor Giotta, So how come, for example, social networks like Facebook have 1.65 billion users worldwide? How come we're so up for sharing information on a social network platform, but when it comes to our government, we do not feel like sharing? Is it like Dr. Walker is saying that it's a generation issue?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and a lot of people are studying it. The type of surveillance that we're subject to on Facebook and Twitter is typically referred to as peer surveillance. And it's a surveillance that you submit to and that you don't feel any sort of psychological threat from typically, right? Because you engage in it yourself, right? The people who have the tools to sort of watch you and follow you on Facebook and Twitter, they're using the same tools that you have. So you can engage in mutual surveillance of each other. You don't have that option with the government. And so that's one of the major problems. But I think that to sort of suggest that the mutual or peer surveillance that we do on social networks isn't a big deal is kind of dangerous, because what that sort of acceptance of peer surveillance does is it habituates us to living in public and to being watched and monitored, so that we're much less likely to actually fear the government's surveillance of us, right? Which is to say, like, when we're so when we feel the constant gaze of our friends and our coworkers and our parents upon us, we're much less likely to be concerned when one of those gazes becomes that of the government.
Talking about Facebook with targeting ads, for example, Professor Celada, can you tell us about the term digital exhaust?
Digital exhaust, yeah, that's referring to the all the information that is gathered through our web activity. You know, every time we access a website, every time we go into, we search on our phone, all that information that gets recorded via a process called data mining and other, like websites, cookies. So all that data, all the communication that goes across from ourselves to whoever we're talking or whatever we're visiting on the web, that's what that term refers to. So all our activities being recorded by a website or by an agency for marketing purposes or marketing reasons, or might be other different reasons they might be researching, but the main one is for marketing.
It can be used in a beneficial way, digital exhaust. And we're going to toss over to reporter Nellie Bowles one last time, who's going to explain in what way. Here is reporter Nellie Bowles.
There's a lot of information that's publicly accessible already about what we search, what we post, and it's all geolocated. So you can see where these searches and these posts are happening. And if you scrape them together and sort of look at do some data analysis on them, you can start to see trends. So in this one example around gun violence, their researchers from various medical schools have gotten together, and you can find that an uptick in searches for ammo means an uptick in gun violence that month. And so you can start to use that also as a predictor.
Dr. Walker, you want to make a comment on digital exhaust?
Well, I think she definitely has a point when she talks about the fact that people are using it for prediction. Marketing research has always attempted to predict what consumers want and need. I think that in that sense, that's helping a lot. I think the problem that I have, and this goes back to the social media aspect of it, this sort of peer surveillance, or even the fact that we feel so comfortable sharing every minute of our lives, every single second of every day. I'm overstating for some people. But the idea is that all of those data points then do allow for prediction. And if you watch John Oliver's show, science isn't necessarily always going to do the right things with those predictions and those predictive data points, right? So how much do we want to give, and how much and how long do we want that stored, and how often do we want that shared? And people believe that if it's not personally identifiable, it doesn't necessarily identify you. Well, there are a lot of data points that are personally identifiable. Your IP address, and that is on your mobile device and your laptops or your desktops. Those things are personally identifiable. So again, I think it comes to consumers really demanding that privacy is important. And I don't see that happening soon, but I hope.
We actually reach our last question, and I would like to ask you of your internet behavior. Do you think twice when you are online, and do you have any recommendations how people should use the internet? Professor Giotta.
Yeah, I mean, most of my friends and students and colleagues think I'm a little bit crazy when it comes to the sorts of things that I do to protect my privacy online, despite using Facebook on occasion. But I use Firefox pretty regularly because the privacy features are stronger on that browser. I also typically use a VPN, which is a virtual private network that sort of tunnels out a little cave for me to escape the gaze of my ISP, and it anonymizes to a certain extent my activity. The VPN, the virtual private network, can see what I'm doing, and it can sort of track me, but it anonymizes me so that I can travel around the upper echelon of the web in a sort of anonymous fashion, and not have marketers tracking me, and not have the government tracking me quite as much. So that's probably the primary thing that I do.
Thank you. Professor Celada.
In my case, it's easier for me to browse, so I don't really think twice, because I know a specific browser that encrypt my data, so all my browsing gets encrypted, or I choose like a specific, let's say, like, for example, WhatsApp. So that's a messaging tool that we can use, and that one has actually encryption on it. So I am assured that my communication from point A to point B, even though intercepted, it will not be taken from me. So I just use channels that I know that are secure.
Dr. Walker.
I use social media a lot. I teach social media marketing in particular, so I do use it, but I think probably 4 or 5 times before I post something, and I recommend that other people do too. I think that, as any good marketer, I'm presenting a side of myself on social media that I want people to see. That's probably not my true self, and I hope I continue to keep that private.
I'd like to thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When I was in foster care, I never knew when I would have to move, so I always had my suitcase ready to go. Then one day, I was adopted. My new parents opened their hearts and home to me. My parents cook my favorite breakfast for me every morning. My parents take me on trips I never thought I would go on. They gave me a home and an even better reason to use that suitcase. My parents aren't perfect, but they're perfect for me.
Kids will spend 15 minutes watching online videos like this one.
Brushing for 2 minutes now can save your child from severe tooth pain later. 2 minutes twice a day. They have the time.
Thank you for watching On Point. You can follow us on Twitter at CSUN On Point. You can listen on KCSN 88.5 FM every Sunday morning at 5:30. You can watch us on LA's Channel 36, also every Sunday morning at 11:30. For all of us here on Point, I'm Mariah Robinson.